Hello and welcome. You're watching To The Point. The top story today is the President's address and what it tells us of the Modi government's vision. Is it just intent and generality, or is it also, in important areas, reassuring? That's the big debate in part two. But first, the Chinese foreign minister's visit as a special envoy. This is the first sign of a new relationship between the two neighbors. So tonight we ask, what can we expect hereafter? And joining me now to discuss India-China relations is India's former ambassador to China, Chandrasekhar Das Gupta, one of India's top scholars from the Centre for Policy Research, Srinath Raghavan, and the former secretary in the Ministry of External Affairs, K.C. Singh. Mr. Das Gupta, let me start with a simple question. As a former ambassador to China, how significant is it that Foreign Minister Wang Yi has been sent as a special envoy to meet the new government literally days after it's taken over?
I think it's an important signal from the Chinese side. It's a signal about the importance they attach to relations with India and the opportunities they see in India as a result of the new economic policies which Mr. Modi has indicated he will follow. They see significant opportunities in the investment sector, for example, in infrastructure. Mr. Modi recently spoke about the modernization of railways, Indian railways, and he pointed to the Chinese example here. So I think there are huge opportunities for Chinese investors in India and for a strengthening of the economic relationship.
I want very much to go into the spheres that could open up in terms of the relationship between the two countries. But first, on this issue of sending a special envoy, do the Chinese do this regularly, or was it a special step in this instance?
I wouldn't say it's regular. On the other hand, it's not unique. It is certainly a special gesture, and I think it should be appreciated as such.
Srinath Raghavan, do the Chinese view Mr. Modi as special? I noticed that Foreign Minister Wang Yi called him an old friend of China. And I believe that during Mr. Modi's trip to Beijing in 2012, he met members of the Politburo, even though he was himself just a chief minister at the time. And he was received at the Great Hall of the People, where apparently only heads of government and heads of state are received.
Well, Mr. Modi is certainly seen very positively by the Chinese press, and whatever reactions that we can see coming out of China to his election as Prime Minister, it is quite clear that the Chinese look at it as a positive development. In fact, there are even sort of murmurs and ripples within the Chinese press about how this may just be a Deng Xiaoping moment for India. And in general, the Chinese have always looked at India as this sort of cacophonic, chaotic democracy, which can never really get its act together. But now with a government with a decisive mandate, which is intent on pursuing, as Ambassador Das Gupta said, a set of very modernizing sort of economic policies, the Chinese do feel that this is a break from the past and that something can be done now.
So if the Chinese are seeing this as a Deng Xiaoping moment, that's a compliment they're paying Mr. Modi.
Yes, of course. Yeah.
K.C. Singh, for his part, does Mr. Modi view China in special terms? He's visited at least 3 times, and today's papers claim that at a speech he made yesterday at a book launch, he was exceptionally impressed with China's skill, scale and speed. So is he particularly akin to seeing China in important, favorable terms?
I think correctly, the new government is adopting a two-pronged approach. One is to look at the economic possibilities which are there in the relationship. But at the same time, there is a strategic context. And remember, this morning, the President in his address has talked of strategic emphasis of relations with China as well as Japan. And it's been talked about that one of the first trips abroad outside the SAARC region of Prime Minister Modi may be to Japan. Now, just about a week ago, after Mr. Modi's government had taken over, firstly, there are 3 signals that the Modi government sent. One is that you had the Tibetan Prime Minister present amongst the SAARC leaders at the swearing in. Secondly, you had a Member of Parliament from Arunachal brought in as a Minister of State in the Home Ministry. Thirdly, a former General, Chief of the Army Staff, is in charge of the Northeast, although we've had a General as Governor in Arunachal but not in charge of the Northeast. So the Chinese are, I think, taking Modi government very seriously, both from the strategic point of view of both the advantages and the risks in dealing with a government like this.
Okay.
And that is why the Shangri-La dialogue, which was just held a week ago, where unfortunately we were not present because the government was just taking over, there were extremely testy exchanges between Prime Minister Abe, the US Defense Secretary, and the deputy of the PLA. And it got very personal, where the general went off the script and said
but
very
come
personal
back,
things
come back
about the
to
Japanese
India,
and the
China.
Americans.
Relate
So
this
that
back
is the
closely.
strategic. So the Chinese are, yeah.
I'll just point out for the audience that we may not have had a
that is-
general
the
in.
Chinese do not want India to be drawn into that.
Okay. Let's come into specifics in a moment's time. All I'll point out for the audience is, although we may not have had a general in Arunachal as governor before General J.J. Singh, we have frequently had generals as governors in Assam. Two former army chiefs as well as army commanders. Mr. Dasgupta, one of the targets that the two governments have, in a sense, agreed upon is to raise trade to 100 billion by 2015. At the moment, that trade relationship is at around 65 billion, but there's a huge trade deficit against India of 31 billion. So if they actually reach that target of 100 billion, can they do it without widening the deficit that runs against India's interest?
No, I don't believe they can. And this is why the government of India is pressing for removal of non-tariff barriers on Indian exports to China, particularly in the pharmaceutical sector and also certain agricultural products. It is very important that the gap should be reduced, not by reducing the overall size of the relationship, but by increasing India's exports. And the quality of the exports also requires attention. In the past, it has consisted largely of minerals, raw materials, and we really do need to change that.
What response do we get from the Chinese when we say open yourselves up to more pharmaceutical exports and more IT exports? Are they resistant?
They have not been very quick in reacting to our concerns. In the past, they've taken the concerns on board. It's not that they've brushed it aside, but I do hope there'll be more palpable progress in these areas in the future.
Srinath Raghavan, one of the plans that's being considered in India so that when the trade imbalance gets larger, we can find a way of balancing out, is to set up industrial parks where the Chinese can invest directly. And I presume this would be FDI, which would in a sense give them a stake in what's happening in India. But after the experience we've had with SEZs under the UPA, how do you view this idea?
Well, I mean, in some ways, there is an economic logic to this because, as Ambassador Dasgupta pointed out, we are having problems getting market access to China. Even if in certain sectors the Chinese do sort of facilitate Indian exports to China, the gap in terms of the trade imbalance is going to remain unfavorable to us for the foreseeable future, unless and until there is a huge manufacturing revival. And all of that is going to take time. So in the short run, the only way to sort of paper over this widening trade deficit that we have is to allow for capital inflows to come in from China. And one productive way in which that can be done, leveraging also Chinese experience, would be to sort of set up these SEZs. And that is something that has already been in the works. So it's not something that this government is sort of initiating today, but it's already been talked about, but it has to be now taken forward. And of course, the challenge, as you're saying, is that, we've had problems with, land, with environmental clearances and so on.
And tax issues.
And tax issues as well. And so the question for the government will be whether they can actually sort of create a framework where the Chinese feel sufficiently encouraged to invest. But by all indications, they are quite keen to move in that direction.
So this is something the Chinese are willing to do, provided we can clear the obstacles surrounding SEZs.
Yes.
Mr. K.C. Singh, the other key concern is the border dispute, and it's a very long problem that's been there bedeviling the relationship for decades. It was discussed at the 3-hour-long meeting between Sushma Swaraj and Foreign Minister Wang Yi yesterday, although we have no real idea beyond the anodyne description from the JSXP about what happened. But I noticed that in an interview he gave The Hindu on Sunday, Mr. Wang Yi expressed optimism that the dispute can be solved with what he called strong will and resolve. In your eyes, does that reference to strong will and resolve and the hope of solution suggest hope for the future? Or is it just a foreign minister being diplomatic because he was asked an awkward question?
If we see these special representatives' discussion of the border issue over the last, say, 10 years, the moment when they have become more accommodating are moments when we were engaging the US and the civil nuclear deal was coming in, and President Bush was indicating that India was being strengthened to balance the Chinese role in Asia, that is when we found greater accommodation. But after 2008, not only vis-a-vis India, but all along the periphery, there's much greater assertiveness and much less movement in terms of culminating in what we found at Daulat Beg Oldie just for a year and a half ago, when they did something unprecedented. They came and camped there. So therefore, the border issue, till now the signal they've given is that there is agreement on principles, but it is stalled there. And as a rising power, generally, if your differential of power is increasing, they didn't show any urgency in settling it, only in stabilizing it and leaving it as a status quo. Therefore, now if they've come and they change it slightly, it is possible that they may become more accommodating, because they can't have an ongoing problem with Japan in the East China Sea, with Vietnam and the other countries in the South China Sea, and with India across the land frontier. It's possible that they may soften the stand and see if there can be some kind of a settlement, but basically we've in the past seen that they are in no hurry.
You know, the interesting corollary or the thought that lies behind that answer is that India's best chances in getting a good and sensible response from the Chinese is when we, in quotes, play either a Japan card or an American card. Do you believe that we need to do more of that, or do you think that's a mistaken view of the Chinese?
No, I'd say that good relations with China give us leverage in our relations with the United States. Close relations with the United States gives us leverage in our relations with China. And the same applies to Japan. So it's important to take a multifaceted approach in foreign policy, a multi-directional approach, where we try and advance our relations with the major players.
What about the other element that was embedded in KC Singh's answer, that China, as an established rising power, is happy to play for time on that relationship, because as the differential in power between India and China grows, their hand grows stronger, and so it's in their interest to delay a solution for as long as they can, because then when you do reach one, they'll be able to impose one on India more readily and more easily.
Well, I mean, there is something to be said for that particular view. And the interview with Foreign Minister Wang Yi that you quoted, he also says that the resolution will take time. It's not something that is going to happen today. On the other hand, the Chinese have also been insisting for a very long time that in some ways it is actually India which is unable to settle the problem, because you do not have consensus domestically, you do not have a government which is strong enough, because we also need to get constitutional amendments, etc. in place to strike a boundary deal. Now, this may be a good opportunity to put the ball back into their court and say that, listen, we are willing to play ball, are you?
Do you think Mr. Modi has the strength, as well as perhaps the conviction, and maybe even the political capacity to strike a deal with the Chinese, something that they offered previously? They haven't offered since the 60s, but do you think he could revive those ideas?
Well, I think
Aksai Chin versus Arunachal?
In some ways that was implicit in the 2005 political parameters agreement. That agreement was struck at a time when India's relations with the United States were getting closer, so we had more leverage with the Chinese. The Chinese have since then sort of slowly backtracked from that agreement. So I think going back to the 2005 principles and insisting that that should be the starting point for the next round of discussions would be a good way to do.
Now, if any of that is going to happen, Mr. KC Singh, it will happen with the present special representative mechanism working with Ajit Doval as NSA. But given that he has not a background of a diplomat, but a background as a IB official, is he the ideal person for this?
We don't know. It is not necessary that the NSA has made the SR. And if you ask me, frankly, that is not correct, because Condoleezza Rice, in fact, says it in a book, that the National Security Advisor should not be practicing or actually dealing with diplomatic or complex issues. National Security Advisor is to coordinate different policy options and throw them up to the government of different possibilities and threats. So it can be someone else who can be named. It is not necessary, because on their side it is not their National Security Advisor, it is their state councillor who links the Foreign Office to the party. Now here it is for the Prime Minister to decide. For all you know, Mr. Amit Shah, I mean, I'm not being facetious, but it has to be somebody who's close to the Prime Minister, whom he trusts and who has political heavyweight, who's a political heavyweight. So we can have someone else.
Do you think that in fact this job, because it's a difficult job and also because it requires the Prime Minister's trust, because eventually at the end of the day it's also a job that requires an enormous political input, that it should be raised to a political level?
Not necessarily. Not necessarily. I think, for example, the previous National Security Advisor, who was also the representative in the talks, did a very fine job.
You're talking of Shiv Shankar Menon.
I'm talking about Shiv Shankar Menon. So I don't think that it need necessarily be raised to a political level. I broadly agree with what K.C. Singh said. I think he made a very telling point, excepting for that example he plucked out, Mr. Amit Shah. I have some reservations on that score.
But you do believe that in fact the NSA doesn't necessarily have to be the special representative. It can be someone else. Because up to now, all Indian NSAs have been special representatives
yes,
as well.
but there's no reason why that should be so.
Now, this is going to be a 6-month period between now and the end of the year, when it said that there could be perhaps 6 more meetings at different levels, multilateral and bilateral, between the Indians and the Chinese, including a visit by the Chinese president to India. Do you get the feeling that there's a new wind of momentum behind this relationship suddenly?
Well, certainly there is, partly because there is a new government. It's a new government which has got a sort of a mandate which is stronger than a previous government. So clearly there is some kind of headwind at this point of time. The question is whether you're able to move forward on the tough issues, make use of the opportunities which are opening up on the economic and other fronts for you, and try and see what you can do with this momentum. So I think, yes, you are off to a good start. Where you get from here is the question.
And the answer to that, where do you get from here, is a real test and challenge for Mr. Modi himself. Because this will be where his capacity to handle an important critical foreign policy issue will be seen.
Well, in many ways, India's policies and relationship with China will cast a kind of a light on what is India's engagement with the great powers across the world, what its relationship with the rest of South Asia itself is, for instance. So in a sense, the relationship with China has many more ramifications than simply being a bilateral relationship for us.
Now, Mr. Dasgupta, the Americans have their own separate concerns about China, and Mr. Modi is due to visit Washington in September. Could an American shadow fall over India's China relationship, or do you think Mr. Modi can adequately separate the two? Because he's equally keen to improve relations with America, and he's talked about today in the President's address reinvigorating that particular relationship.
I think we can separate the two. We've never allowed an American shadow to fall over our relations with China. And to revert to that question which you put to Srinath a little while ago, yes, it will be a test for Mr. Modi. It will be equally a test for his Chinese counterpart.
Except for the fact that I take it his Chinese counterpart has perhaps more experience of handling foreign policy than Mr. Modi does. For Mr. Modi, this is not just a test, but it's also something he's never been tested on before.
Well, yes, that's true.
Are you at all concerned that having got this relationship off to such a promising start, with the Chinese sending someone across, that maybe expectations have been raised a bit too much, particularly as far as the Indian press is concerned?
No, I'm not concerned. I'm hopeful.
You're hopeful?
Yes, it gives cause for hope rather than concern.
One of the things the Indian press does is when there are periodic border incursions, and they seem to happen 2 or 3 times a year, it blows them up into not just a political story but a nationalist story, and that clearly would embarrass the UPA government right through the Manmohan Singh years. Do you think if the same thing happens again, Mr. Modi will be better able to keep the press at arm's length and perhaps ignore the pressure they're building up and say to himself, I'm not going to allow myself to fall under pressure of the press, I'm going to carry on a sensible relationship?
Well, that in many ways was what the previous UPA government tried to do, which was to try to insulate itself from its pressure. But I think the right way to approach it is not to try and keep the press at arm's length, but actually to inform public opinion. Why not tell the people what the facts of the case are and explain to them that we don't have a line of actual control which is well defined? I mean, the fact of the matter is that not just the press but the country at large has serious misconceptions about what the nature of our problem with China is.
And that, in fact, in a very real sense, is a critical lesson they need to learn, which Dr. Manmohan Singh didn't. He didn't inform the press, he didn't tell them about the nature of the line of control or the nature of the incursions, which in fact happen on both sides, both parties doing it. Exactly. That's a lesson Mr. Modi needs to learn.
Sure.